Welcome to this episode of Season 5 of The Common Bridge, where policy and current events are discussed in a fiercely nonpartisan manner. The host, Richard Helppie, is a philanthropist, entrepreneur, and political analyst who has reached over 4 million listeners, viewers, and readers around the world. With our surging growth in audience and subscriptions, The Common Bridge continues to expand its reach. The show is available on the Substack website and the Substack app. Simply search for The Common Bridge. You can also find us on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. The Common Bridge draws guests and audiences from across the political spectrum, and we invite you to become a free or paid subscriber on your favorite medium.
Hello, welcome to The Common Bridge. I'm your host, Rich Helppie, and today we have one of our favorite, most popular guests, Mr. Robert Greenfield. Robert is an American, but he has traveled, lived, and worked nearly all over the world. We haven't found him in Antarctica yet, but certainly Australia, Europe, Asia, many points across the United States, and probably a lot we don't know about. And today we're just going to talk broadly about what's going on with the United States, European relationships, how America is being viewed in various quarters, and anything else we want to talk about. In case there might be an election coming up, or unrest on college campuses, or a war in the Middle East, or something like that. So, Robert, it's great to see you. What part of the world are we finding you in today?
Hi, Rich. It's what a wonderful pleasure to be back with you. I think this is year number 4 or something like that. First of all, congratulations on your ongoing success. I follow The Common Bridge all the time. You have tremendous guests. I mean, you had presidential candidates this year, especially you've done transgender. You've done so many topics, and it's a great public service that you're doing, and it's an honor to be here with you. So first of all, I want to say that thank you, and thank you to Brian Kruger for the great job that he does to support you. Today, I'm in the south of France, and it is finally getting warm. It was a little bit chilly. Nearby, yesterday, we had Xi Jinping and Macron. So we're in kind of an interesting spot here. And then Xi Jinping went on his way to Hungary, where I currently live in Budapest. So there's some action happening here in France and in Europe, and I'm happy to be able to share that with you today.
Well, this is one of the many reasons you're one of the most popular guests, even outpulling some of the more famous people and people that weren't famous than are now. We'd like to get back on, but they got bigger audiences, I guess. So, Robert, just in general terms, to set the stage, when you look at the future of the United States, and let's just limit it to Europe relationships right now with Biden and or with Trump, and perhaps the contrast between what is the current state and what's kind of the future look like in your estimation. And you can go at this any way you want to, culturally, economically, or otherwise.
I think the best way to describe this, Rich, for your listeners and viewers, is that Europe is in transition. And regardless of whether it's Trump or Biden that is elected in November 2024, Europe is now being confronted with taking on more of the burden of their own defense, number one. Number two is that what they call the golden era of peace, or the peace dividend, meaning really from the end of World War II, but particularly from the fall of the wall in 1989 until February 2022, when Russia invaded Ukraine. Essentially, Europe did not pay its own way. They were under the American nuclear umbrella. They were under the American military support. There's bases everywhere, ranging from the UK, which is no longer in the EU, but it's still a part of Europe, all the way down to places like Italy, of course, here in France, huge in places like Germany. So there was that. Then there was the expansion of NATO, which is now increased under Biden. However, we are in transition. So the number one thing to think about if you are an American listening to this or anybody anywhere is what is Europe going to do in the future? And I can tell you the way that it looks right now, I'll make my opening statement. It does not look terribly positive for Europe. They're not prepared. They're not prepared politically. They're not prepared economically. And they're definitely not prepared defense-wise.
You know, Robert, when I think about the history of Europe, that the countries there have been at war literally for centuries. The boundaries of countries have shifted many, many times. We have ethnicities that were living in an area under one government and stayed in the same place and lived in a second, third, fourth, and sometimes a fifth one. Europe has done some great things, and now they have the situation with the declining birth rates, that their economies seem to be a little stagnant. And, when you think about the innovations that are really changing the world, they're, largely coming from the United States, and the manufacturing is being done in the Pacific Rim and elsewhere. What's left for Europe? And how do they manage with all of those demographic pressures?
Okay, so let's hit it with the demographics first, because that is probably the number one issue after defense. Defense is solvable, by the way. Donald Trump was right. Before him, Obama said the same thing, but Trump said it a lot stronger, which was about the contribution and defense spending. But that can be solved. Poland's solving it. Some other places are solving it. It's not a bleak outlook for that. But the demographics is a serious problem, and the way that it's being solved is not in a way that it's a revolution. Basically, on the demographic side, immigration has been played with as former colonies are invited, their people are invited into France. That's not working out at all. That's predominantly a Muslim type of intake, and they are not integrating very well in France. In fact, there's major changes that the French people are not happy with. Similarly, in the UK, you've got a place where I think, and last year we even mentioned this in our discussion, around 39% of London are English, traditional English, meaning Irish or, English, of course, or Welsh or Scottish. Now, that's way less than half. So you've got a demographic there. That's the mayor of London has now been reelected again. He is, a Pakistani first-generation guy. The Rishi Sunak is a Hindu, and he's now the prime minister. Until the last couple of weeks, the head of Scotland was actually a mixture of a Kenyan as well as a Pakistani who was also a Muslim. So you've got a change here that's happening in Europe that is freaking people out, to be honest.
Yeah, and look, I think this actually speaks really well to Western style democracy. From the Magna Carta to the United States Constitution, it really doesn't matter where people come from. It doesn't matter what their ethnicity is, their religion. I believe the mayor of London is a Muslim, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, Khan is his name,
and
yes.
So guess what? Everybody can participate in this. And, to me, that really speaks well to those structures, and that people are drawn to countries governed like that versus the reverse. It's not like, okay, the traditional Anglo-Irish, Welsh, Scottish people that populated the English Isles, they didn't move to Africa or to the Middle East or to Asia. It's people were attracted to come to that kind of society. And I think that speaks really, really well to that underlying structure. But, we have to get off this idiotic identity politics thing, which doesn't benefit anybody that I can tell.
Yeah, well, okay, we're going to have to segue this slightly to what is, I think, something.
Yeah, let's talk about other things like How about the
No.
Ukraine
I
war?
want to. This is critical, and it's
Okay.
something that I think is big for you, and it's values. You are very much Rich, a values guys. Whether you're talking about values and culture, okay, and the people that are entering into Europe struggling that they're not converting them to their values. So, in other words, they're not European values. There is my son lives in the Netherlands, and he was remarking there that there's a very large Muslim community. They don't want to celebrate what was called King's Day. They were protesting against it. King's Day is a traditional day, even though they have a nominal king, but it's a day of celebration of their culture, of their way of life. So it kind of freaked out people. So the issue here is Europe is struggling with what is the number before our culture and our values are overwhelmed. Can we convert the people that are coming in to our values? Because they are coming from countries, not all. I mean, India is a democracy, even though it's a democracy under threat right now, as we know, right, with Modi and his Hinduism. But you know, a lot of places they're coming from, they don't have the same values, the values that you're talking about from the Magna Carta on up. And this is something that Europe is clearly struggling with.
Well, look, I agree with your point, and there are always those that think tribalism is going to prevail because they imagine their tribe's going to win and the other tribe is going to be vanquished. Our own president talks in those terms when he talks about the quote MAGA Republicans. And that tribalism's never worked out for the tribalists. But democracy, constitutional representation has worked out pretty well in terms of peace and prosperity and in productivity and in rising standards of living. And we need, I think, to do a better job about educating people about the various forms of governance, whether it be, constitutional republic, a monarchy, or a totalitarian state. And I mean, history's spoken at this point. Constitutional democracies have proven better for everyone. And I know you'll remember this, that during the period of post World War II, that the Grapes of Wrath movie was shown to Russians to show them how bad life was in America. And it backfired because the proletariat said, hey, those guys are pretty well off. They've got a truck. So, it's, I think that we need to shine a light on, actual facts, which, I know that we've drifted away from. But look, we'll see if people are going to speak up and say, look, wait a minute, we need to stay based in science and mathematics, and we need to be able to build things, grow things, heal things versus yell about things. We shall see.
Well,
Um,
that leads me. I want to make a point with that positive on the American side. Obviously, as you said, I've lived in all these different places, and democracies run. In some countries, they run much better. In other countries, they don't run as well, right? But I would say this: in general, democracies are under threat around the world, and one of the reasons are, and I'm going to go back and hit it again because I've been very pro immigration into, let's say, into Australia. Even Australia now, immigration is a question because the numbers aren't working. It's a numbers situation, Richard, and I think that we all need to recognize that the United States, ironically, even though we have the so-called polarization, I would say this: the United States is seen by Europe. If you want to ask how the Europeans feel about the U.S., they feel the United States is even stronger than ever. They believe that the U.S. came out of COVID very strong. They believe that the U.S. did their investment with their infrastructure, et cetera, at the right time. And of course, the U.S. has the U.S. dollar, and it's the global reserve currency. So what you have is a very dynamic situation in the United States. They don't like when they look at the U.S. and look at the rich-poor divide. They don't like that. They feel in Europe that they have a better way about that. but every one of them will say that the U.S. is the envy of the Western world when it comes to dynamism, economy, how they get immigrants into the country. It's crazy, but people get in, they have jobs, and the economy is reflected in that. So I want to make that very clear that to Americans who are sitting there and kind of worrying about, oh my gosh, things are terrible in America. I have to tell you, compared to the rest of the world, including China, the United States is seen as an economic success. It's seen as a success in many ways with immigration. Of course, nobody wants the southern border, and people freak out about boats coming into to Europe. So the southern border has to be fixed. But the United States is not viewed as a power in decline by the Europeans. Not at all. They see the United States as a big brother who might not be reliable, but it's definitely the strongest 800-pound gorilla on the block.
Yeah, that's a welcome and interesting perspective, because it almost, it's like, well, the U.S. looks like a stronger country relative to the others around the world versus measured against perhaps where we were. So by way of example, some of the things you talk about, the dollar as the reserve currencies, but we're abusing it with printing a lot of money and driving up debt that just can't be repaid. Where our products were the envy of the world, we have airplanes with bolts blowing off, and we have ships running into bridges. We can't seem to get everybody into houses. We can't control the border. And we've got this system that is clogged up. I mean, we can do better as a country. And to your point, I think my experience with some of the other economies in Europe, they do a better job of making sure that the base is more stable than what we've traditionally had in the U.S. And that's a tricky proposition, to make sure that everybody's got a certain level of standard of living without thwarting or chilling the ability to be entrepreneurial. So it's a real dilemma, but it's good to know. Robert, on defense, the thing that troubles me about defense is that you have commentators here in the United States, and I don't know if you've followed this at all, saying, well, hey, these defense bills are good because we're going to be able to sell missiles and bullets and tanks and airplanes that are made in the United States. And if you recall the book Catch 22, it was, war is good because what's good for M&M Enterprises, the quartermaster, is good for everybody. And I mean, it's like, that's insane. Why do we that? Doesn't sound like a sustainable growth engine. Eventually you run out of people to shoot at, I guess. Or we should.
I don't think there's going to be a shortage of people to shoot at, because we've got but your point is well taken. And I think that the Europe looks at the U.S. as definitely a war type of economy. It's true what you're saying. They don't look at the U.S. as producing products, U.S. design, but Apple's made in China. U.S. design, things Tesla, that's even made in Germany, on and on it goes, right? So it's true what you're saying about specifically on the defense side. The defense companies obviously have done quite well with the Ukraine-Russia war, but that it's not sustainable. Absolutely not. To let you know what the Europeans are doing about that is the Germans have gone from essentially having no defense industry. And they had a couple of things, this thing called the Leopard tanks, and they make a big deal about it. But they were not cost efficient. But now they're starting to make stuff. Poland is starting to make stuff. There's a lot of people that are saying we cannot count on the U.S. as the umbrella, including nuclear umbrella. By the way, we should get into that a little bit. Poland wants nuclear weapons placed in their country because their feeling is they're not going down. If Russia comes across the border, they're going to go to DEFCON and they're going to go to World War III. They are not going to be overrun again. There are countries in Europe that are saying no mas, no more. They're not going to give another, inch of territory. But the bottom line for the Americans is the U.S. is not transitioning away from a defense orientation. It is dominated by those large contractors. You mentioned Boeing. I have been railing on about Boeing forever because they're a defense contractor first. They're a commercial airline maker, aircraft maker second, and they're terrible at making commercial aircraft because they're not focused on it. They're focused on everything but that, and they've got their stock price, their share price. So the United States has got a serious issue when it comes to too much reliance on the defense industry. No doubt about it.
Yeah, and Poland asking for nuclear weapons. Now, Poland part of NATO, and that's obviously something that makes Vladimir Putin very nervous. And now we have a emerging story that'll soon be making the established media ecosystem, where the United States apparently had listening posts in Ukraine monitoring Russia, and that didn't turn out well for the Ukrainians. And I can't imagine the Russians sitting there while Poland arms up, even at the risk of a all-out war with NATO. It just doesn't seem like a very good path forward.
No, it doesn't. So we've got Macron who says, so that's France. They're saying they want to put boots on the ground in Ukraine. They say they want to extend their nuclear umbrella right up to the Ukraine border. You've got Poland saying they want let's break it down here. The reason why the Cold War worked was because there was the Soviet nuclear umbrella and there was the American nuclear umbrella. Even though Britain picked up some nukes and then France picked up some nukes, generally speaking, everybody said it was all about America versus the Soviets, right? And so I have attended seminars, Richard, here where people are talking by NATO experts and they're talking about the nuclear umbrella is breaking down. So when the nuclear umbrella of the U.S. is breaking down, what does that mean is there's a lot of people who are picking up nukes or want to pick up nukes. And they have this term, Richard, called screwdriver ready, meaning with basically a few parts. Poland could have its own bomb. Australia can have its own bomb. There's several countries that are sitting there on technology that they could do that. And we're not talking about, these precision guidance, 100 million US dollars per bomb. We're talking dirty bombs, right? We're talking tactical nukes in the field. These are things that kill anywhere from 5,000 to 100,000 people. And so when we're talking about now this proliferation of the nuclear side, and I stopped in Geneva and talked to an expert in this, and he confirmed, he said, yes, definitely. This is a guy who used to work for the United Nations. He's been working on disarmament. And he noted that basically everyone's walked away from disarmament. Okay. So if everybody walks away from disarmament, the problem for Putin is he's going to have half a dozen guys now that if he wants to attack them, they're saying, I don't care about the Americans in World War III. I care about when you breach the Polish border, you're going to get Moscow bombed. That's how they're going to go. And so does that escalate to a World War I scenario? I don't know.
No, I don't. No, it's not going to be World War I where there's standoffs and trenches. And look, I'm wondering, are we being conditioned for a nuclear exchange? Recently, there was a map of Michigan. It was said, oh, here's where I forget how many, a 50 nuclear warhead strike. Here's what they would hit, and here would be a 200 or 2,000 warhead hit. And I'm thinking, who made that up and why was that newsworthy? But and you hear about the ultra rich building bomb shelters and things. And years ago, I was sitting next to Senator Warren Rudman at a dinner and had an opportunity if you remember, he was working on the Graham Rudman on disarmament. And he said the biggest issue they had was they didn't know who had them because this was post the Soviet Union coming apart, and they didn't know where they were and had to go find them. And then when you look at warfare today, it's sort of make the next step beyond the Cold War where there was a clear line drawn. Now we've got drones. So instead of tanks against tanks, or fixed infantry positions against fixed infantry position, amazing amount of devastation can come through drones. So how good
Yes.
is a Trident missile fired at Moscow against a nuclear armed drone coming in and dropping something on
Yeah.
Warsaw? And that's where
It's
we're at, and that's
interesting.
where
Yeah. Go ahead.
yeah. So
Yes.
Robert, I look at you as an expert on, for lack of a better term for simplification, nationalism versus globalism, and that
Hmm.
someplace in there we need to have a balance, that if people are trading with each other, they're less likely to go to war with each other, and
Yes.
on an equal playing field. And if you can, if you care to comment on that, and then maybe I really want to hear your take from Europe on, will the Ukraine war end, and who might prevail? And then now, when you're telling me, this is news to me, by the way, that France is now saying they want to put boots on the ground, I'm thinking, one of the issues was, Ukraine running out of soldiers. Well, that's a
Yes.
little troubling. So,
Yeah, well, I'll answer the last part first because the globalism nationalism is a bigger question, but I want to answer that too. Just on the last one, there's controversy about that. Poland claims they have boots on the ground inside Ukraine today. They're not on the front line, right? But it's obviously a shared border, right? For 2/3 of the
yeah, but,
country, it's,
look, we
kind of
remember,
thing. So they are ready to
Vietnam.
go in. Sorry, go
Vietnam, remember, oh, we're only sending in advisors and observers.
ahead.
Like
Yeah,
nobody
yeah.
parachutes the
Oh,
101st in, or the 82nd in as the first thing. It's always, hey, we're not involved here. We're just sending in, guys are going to be in the back. They're going to be helping with logistics. Hey, wait a minute. Somebody shot at our people. I mean, what's the exit strategy once that first deployment goes? What's the next logical step that's going to happen?
yeah, that's what it was, the World War One, not the trench thing, but how everybody gets sucked into something that they don't really want to get sucked into, and then the result is something that is catastrophic for a lot of people. Anyway, the point about what's happening with people, essentially, Europe cannot let Ukraine collapse. That's the bottom line. Okay, so the weapons being sent in by the United States are very late to the party. They are precision. They are stuff that can reach into Russia, and they will stop. They'll halt the Russian advance in some ways. However, the Ukraine has got not the Ukraine. Ukraine has a big problem. They got a manpower problem. Ukraine's population, it was 48 million 12 years ago when Crimea was part of Ukraine. Now it's 37 million. So they have lost permanently. They are also, thousands and thousands of young men are refusing. They're leaving. They're just like in Russia. They ran over the Finnish border. Now the Ukrainians are running away. They don't want to die. So there is a manpower shortage, and they're doing the 30-year-old guys, the 35, the 40-year-old guys, the multiple deployments. We all know how that goes, right? You burn people out, and people are back in Ukraine. The media. I was watching PBS tonight. It's tough. It's tough for Ukraine to recruit people. We're all trying to pump up the Ukraine population, and but they haven't got enough people. They don't have enough people. So I think ultimately they cannot win this war with the manpower that they have today. You can't blow your way out of this with, as you talked about, $10 million Patriot missiles versus drones. You can't win a war with a 1,000 or 10,000 Iranian drones versus 10 Patriot missiles. The numbers don't work. Okay, and the U.S. Is muscle bound. Most of the stuff the U.S. has is really high tech. It takes a lot of training. Ukraine guys are smart, but ultimately they've got a manpower shortage.
So how is Macron's announcement that they wants to put French boots on the ground in Ukraine playing with the French people?
Well, that's a broad question. Okay, just in general, the French look at Macron as talks big but doesn't do a lot. Okay, so just don't think that there's 100,000 Frenchmen, getting over there with their espresso machines and their croissants right now. They're not. He talks a lot. Most of the France has got it's a wonderful country. It's a beautiful country, but they have a problem, which is France has not decided who are they going to be in the future. They're trying to lead Europe, and the country that should be leading Europe is Germany, and the country that opted out of Europe is the UK. So the people that are not holding up their end of the bargain here is the Germans. The Germans are a real problem for everybody because they don't want to fight. They have that obviously horrible history. They want to protect their EV industry. They want to protect the auto industry. They want to be able to work 35 hours a week. They got unions everywhere, all that kind of stuff, which it all sounds wonderful in a world where it's not under pressure. But every analyst here, if you ask them and cut through the bullshit, they will say, this is a German problem, not a French problem. France is far from the front line. They could send over a token force of 10,000 people. I don't know, what would that make a difference? Okay, would it really make a difference? No. They are in trench warfare in Ukraine right now. So you want to ask, we could cut to the chase here on who's going to win or not. Mostly everybody is hoping that nothing happens bad until the U.S. election. And then after the U.S. election, to be completely honest, and we'll put it right out there, Ukraine feels if Trump wins, he's already said not a penny for Ukraine, that Ukraine will have to cease try for a ceasefire with Russia. That ceasefire would look like they would lose all the parts that Russia's essentially occupied, the Donbass region. They will lose, of course, Crimea permanently, and they will try to get a stabilized line. In return, they will get a pathway to NATO and a pathway to the EU. But Ukraine is a corrupt society. They're not a country that runs in a democratic manner. So that's kind of the Trump scenario. If it is Biden, they're looking for Biden to give him more arms and to keep fighting it out for another year or two. But if Biden is elected, it is an endless fight. If Trump is elected, they're saying it's ceasefire and partial dismemberment of Ukraine.
That's really something when you think about that pivotal world event hinging on the votes in the United States of America, on our wacky political system and our corrupted media ecosystem. I don't know if we're going to get to that today, but I do see some green shoots out there. Again, I'm a perpetual optimist, so maybe we'll come back down to just a quick response session at the end. So, Robert, moving along now, let's stay in Europe a little bit, and you and I had corresponded a little bit, and I'm not sure I can even form this into a question. But one of the topics that you said, we want to talk about whether the woke revolution has entered Europe, what will happen at the university level, as well as with immigration, what happens to migrants when they come to Europe, and how can Europe handle this crisis? And I was particularly struck in our correspondence prior to coming on today that you did encapsulate it as a crisis. What should Americans be thinking about, or our audience around the world?
Okay, so this is obviously controversial, right? But let's hit.
So that's why people listen. That's why people listen to us. That's why your ratings are so high, my friend, because you're fearless. Okay.
Okay. So On the woke side, I think it's a global issue on the woke side, the DEI side, all of that kind of thing. I've gone to enough conferences here with enough people from the UK, from France, from Hungary, from Germany, from Netherlands, from Italy. So these are people who from Czech. Maybe 9 or 10 countries have shown up, and they give their view. These are people that label themselves specifically as center right, okay? Which I'm still center left, but I have to tell you on this issue, I'm probably moved to center right. And what does that mean? What it means is that at the university level, the left has a deeply entrenched philosophy that they have taken over most of the major universities, and it's very similar to the United States in the sense that the Europeans are lamenting they're not studying science, they're not studying math, they're studying social science, they're studying DEI, they're studying a lot of things that universities traditionally only lightly touched on, or they had a department, but they feel now that they are dominating the woke side. That was a shocker for me, Richard, a big shock. I can give you some chapter and verse on it. I won't go into it right now, but I would tell you that the general feeling is people feel that their culture is under threat. And when they say their culture, they're talking about traditional Western culture. Now, that could be, unfortunately, people try to define that as white male culture. Whereas that is not white male culture. That is culture that comes from 2,000 years of history. So the way that this is conflated is it makes things difficult, especially at the university level. And so that's why you get a match, boom, it gets lit. And overnight, you've got Hamas and the things in the United States that spread to here. It spread to Australia, not in the same level. And the reason why it hasn't spread here is because the legacy of the Holocaust, people tamp that down very quickly. They don't want to hear anything that is anti-Semitic at all. It's not that people wouldn't like to go out and do their Hamas protesting here, but governments are very leery of allowing that to be, taken up. But the point I want to make here on the woke side is
let
that
me
it
ratchet
has
up
affected countries.
Yeah. So let me just, before we get too far into this, when I see these protests, or they're dubbed pro-Palestinian, anti-Israel, however you want to caption it, I'm impressed with the supply chain management. All right, that you get those many tents distributed in that many locations with a management team ready to erect them, and then with the headgear, with the slogans, with that, I'm like, wow, that was really well organized. And I'm, and people are masked up, and I've seen some interviews, and I've done some talking to myself, like, what is it you're protesting about? Well, I haven't been trained yet, so I can't tell you. Peggy Noonan wrote about this. I actually asked somebody, the river to the sea. I said, what river and what sea? Didn't know. Okay. What river and what sea? And I think the low point was somebody equating the anti-Vietnam demonstrations of the 60s, Rosa Parks' civil disobedience, with the
Yes.
BLM riots, and with Hamas's attacks. And I didn't respond to the person, but it's like, Rosa Parks stood up, and ultimately we got the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. When the Vietnam
Yes.
protests were going on, it was a specific policy. What are we doing there? Let's get out. And it worked. BLM has apparently put millions of dollars in pockets of people that were running that organization, and they bought houses, and that's since left. You don't hear about them doing anything. And then Hamas would just as soon kill a lot of the people that are out there with their support. It's a terrorist
for Palestine.
organization. Yeah, they're not right. I would imagine that your average Palestinian doesn't want, and particularly your Gazans, they don't want any part of these guys. Anybody that can go in and attack concert goers, rape, burn babies, kill people, that was their best move, and it's worthy of support. It makes zero sense to me, but I again think it goes back to education. We're not teaching people to do stuff, and we're not teaching people the actual results of history.
Yeah, there's a systemic problem, Rich. There's no doubt about it. If you look at some of the interviews now that there's more time to interview people and it's less hysterical, a lot of people are saying, "Hey, I went to Colombia because it has a history of protest, so it's in the DNA. You should expect it." There's a lot of people who are saying that the universities in the United States have been changed or reflecting this to the point where what do you expect? Maybe that's true. Maybe that's the real problem. Maybe the problem is, like I can tell you from Vietnam War, you were mentioning that there were no professors who were marching with us. We were not allowed on campus, as an example, right? We had to take our protests off campus or to Washington D.C. or something like that, right? We didn't, sit out with encampments with nice tents, as you say, and where do I get my latte, kind of thing. So it's a latte crowd to me. I'm sorry to say that they are to me they are missed the point. The students have. I do write about this subject. I've written about it in several different ways, and I'm very disappointed in this generation. And they think it's their Vietnam moment. It's not their Vietnam moment. It's a moment. I admit it's a moment, and they have a lot to be unhappy about. But they are not nuanced. We are not getting good debate. We are not getting thoughtful kind of expressions of what should be done or not be done. And they're really, I think they missed the mark.
Yeah, I was talking to a Columbia grad who was on campus at the time of the Vietnam protests, and he was quite proud of that, justifiably. And remember, the opposition came from the establishment of, hey, it's the domino theory. We have to fight them now versus fight them later. You've got recordings of JFK saying, I don't understand why we'd want to be in Vietnam, but I can't give up that much real estate to the communists this close to an election. Lyndon Johnson said, I don't know what this whole country's worth to the Vietnamese, but it's sure not worth it to us. And did those protests work and get change? Richard Nixon went out at night, left the White House, went on the mall, and talked to protesters, and was deeply troubled by it and knew that we had to exit that. And so the Vietnam protests were about, let's change a specific policy that we don't buy into. The sudden awakening of, let's all go be pro-Palestinian Hamas backers and go for the destruction of Israel because it looks popular, is a completely different thing. And obviously, this is anecdotally and coming through news sources, but I did watch a long, just live recording. The protesters and the faculty supporting this, when they get in front of a camera, aren't helping themselves. They're like astonished that anybody would have a problem, and that their meal cards wouldn't work, and they couldn't get back in their building when they needed to take a shower. It's like, yeah, you're really committed to the cause, aren't you? Okay, we beat those guys up enough, Robert. But let's wrap up on the woke revolution in Europe and at the university level. What's going on over there, and then I'd like to spend a little time around China.
Yeah, I have a specific example. I'm hoping that you and I can interview this guy. A professor gave a talk from Sciences Po. Sciences Po has produced the last 9 prime ministers in France. It's an English French university. Both of my wife's children have attended there. In fact, one is now doing a Sciences Po Columbia public policy master's degree. So I know a bit about it. He came and gave a talk, and he talked about social Darwinism versus real Darwinism. Okay. And he used it as a metaphor that there were something like 72 classes that are focused on, DEI, social Darwinism, equity, all of that. And there were 0 classes on real Darwinism, meaning, the origin of the species, and as opposed to essentially what are the values of the left that they're putting into the system. His point, and he was fired for that, by the way, because he brought that up, and he tried to do a class, and they said no, it doesn't. That's not Sciences Po. Sciences Po again is kind of a combination of Columbia and Harvard together. So, and Georgetown, as an example. So the point that is made here, and this is true also in the UK, it's not true in some of the more right-wing sides, which is including Hungary. But generally speaking, in Europe, the EU has a policy that is very much a DEI type policy. And it's coming out of these universities. So they're graduating people that are now filling the ranks. As you know, in the United States, there's a lot of discussion about, well, we don't have enough sales guys, but we're hiring another 8 DEI, people in our HR department, that kind of stuff, right? So that type of thing is happening here. How bad is it? I don't know, but I do know that there are a lot of governments that are what the U.S. would consider socialist that are really grappling with it. They are trying to slow it down. In fact, Netherlands, the Scandinavian countries are all saying, whoa, 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 this is getting to be too much. France has got a historical problem, I told you, with immigration. They've got a DEI problem. There are, books being written here about Islam taking over France. So this is a crisis kind of point. And the universities, frankly speaking, are turning out young people that this is the topic. They're not talking pure sciences anymore. They're talking social science. This is a big deal. If you're spending your money and your resources, such as in the United States, look at Harvard, same kind of thing. Look at the UCLA, same kind of thing. You're talking about, there's only so many resources, and if you're going to focus those resources on DEI style, and again, this is going to be very controversial because people look at me as a Democrat. How can he talk like this? Well, my values are universities. Yes, they could be places, should be places for debate, but you also have to have core science, core math, core physics, right, core IT kind of things. Or as a society, you're not going to get fed on DEI with more and more DEI people. And that's a problem.
Yeah, and look, Robert, I believe that we do need to have a more just society. We do need to make sure that there's opportunity. We do need to make sure that there is inclusion. And, I don't care what gender, national origin, race, color, for the person designing the bridge, as long as they're a good bridge engineer. Okay.
Exactly.
And that's where we need to go. And similarly, when the surgeon walks in and says, "Hi, I'm going to be your surgeon today," I want to know that surgeon, whoever he or she might be, that they're capable of doing this, and that they had to compete with other people that wanted that job, and that this is the best and the brightest and the most, dexterity that can do that surgery. And this, and as you know, I talked to lots of people from all walks of life constantly. And more, when I talk to a more recent immigrant, they're all about, wow, there's so much opportunity here, and here's what I can be. And, mostly people of color that are coming from Africa or Central America or Cuba, and they, or Mexico, they just want to work. And the beautiful thing is this: their kids are going to great universities, all right? Because they did what every other immigrant population, including mine, did. They did the the work that had to be done in order that their kids could have a better opportunity. And so I agree with your point. We need to be educating for skills. So look, before we go into, we'll do a little lightning round at the end, but I would like you to talk a little bit about the electric vehicle market. I know you've got extensive business experience in China, and I know you've maintained those relationships.
Yeah.
You've got extensive depth in Hungary as well as the United States. And because of some of your work in the software field, you help bridge that, frankly. So China,
Yes, so
what do they want for the electric vehicle market? And what happens if they do something like acquiring Stellantis? And is Hungary going to be their toehold? And these are all international businesses, including U.S. subsidiaries. So I know it's kind of a broad topic, but can you just enlighten our listeners, readers, and viewers about that?
yeah, so you've hit on all the key points. Thank you for bringing this up. Um, the way that Europe, it's very important that Americans understand this. The way that Europe looks at motor vehicle production, if you don't make cars, you are a second tier guys, right? And under the old Soviet system, Hungary didn't make cars, they grew stuff. Czech made cars, other places made cars, even Romania made cars. None of the cars were very good, right? But after the fall of the wall, these car companies, survived. Germany's crown jewels are their cars: Audi, Mercedes, VW with their broad portfolio, which I think even includes Porsche. So there's a tremendous amount of pride in the Germans in their car industry. The UK still has a car industry, pretty much saved, by the way, by the Indians, like Tata has saved those companies. And Stellantis is an interesting one because they own two of the big brands in France, Citroën, Peugeot. Obviously, they own Jeep, Dodge, those brands, as well as Fiat. So they're a big kind of conglomerate. So let me tell you the key point here and the toehold in Hungary, which is really, really a fascinating thing. Most people look at Viktor Orban and they say, oh, yeah, that's the guy that went down to see Trump in Mar-a-Lago, and he's Trump's friend, and Trump wants to be more authoritarian like Orban. Or they say Viktor Orban, he's the guy that's kicking sand in the face of the EU and is friends with Putin. They look at him as kind of a gadfly. The CPAC went there, Tucker Carlson went there, everybody. But it only hit me the other day when I saw Xi Jinping is only visiting 3 countries in Europe: France, Serbia, which is basically a plane stop, and then 3 days in Hungary. Nobody goes 3 days to Hungary. Okay, they're just like nobody. They're 9+ million people, small little country. And why is he going there? He is putting in the EV, not just the batteries, but remember the batteries are the big deal. He's putting in the production. The production of a company called BYD, which is the number one, not Tesla, number one electric vehicle company in the world. And they have a long history, 20-some year history of EVs. Great Wall is China. They're called Great Wall Motors. They're going into Hungary. So here's the bottom line. Hungary gets electric vehicle production. They're already doing Suzuki hybrids, which I drive one of those. They are doing, and they're going to flood Europe. They are going to scare the bejesus out of the Germans. The Germans, again, the crown jewels for them. They make a lot of money. The Germans made a massive mistake. They transferred all their high tech to China because they wanted to win that market. They're losing market share there. So Germany has got a real, they need a come to Jesus moment. What are they going to do for the future? But Viktor Orban is the mouse that roared. This guy has now got cars, and he's got EVs, and he's got cheap EVs, and he's going to flood Europe. So in 10 years, you're going to see 1 million, 2 million, 3 million BYD and others. Stellantis is an investment group. They are not car people. So what people are talking about here, not a lot. I'm one of the first to be talking about it. I think that Stellantis is ripe for a takeover by the Chinese once they get to a certain size. Now, if they take over Stellantis, whether it's done through proxies or however it's done, it will be China Inc. And essentially, it'll be China versus Germany for car production in Europe. That changes everything. The US, as you know, has cut off the Chinese EVs. They cannot get into the United States. The UAW has had its recent moment. They may have another moment. But I just wanted everybody to know over here in Europe, yes, Hungary is the entry point, and electric vehicles are a big deal. You don't need to do the complex internal combustion engine to be able to do that. You got a battery, you got a body, boom, away you go, and a charger.
Yeah, and Stellantis would be really interesting because they own Jeep, an iconic American brand with ties back to our military, and I drive a Jeep, so it'd be interesting. I don't know how I'd feel about that if it's owned by the Chinese. Robert, a great conversation. How do you feel about a little lightning round? Try to do, and I'll ask a question. You get 30 to 60 seconds to rat-a-tat on it. And anything you don't want to talk about, you can just say pass, and we'll hold it for the next time we get together.
Okay, if it's Stormy Daniels, pass.
Well,
Sorry.
that actually might be a good place to start. So, in my reading of late, both sides, the left and the right, agree this is lawfare being waged. That of course, the political right has been more alarmed about the destruction of the legal system, and the left's like, well, so what? Trump's got to face a Manhattan jury, and that first civil case
Yeah,
was
well, my
ridiculous.
view on, yeah,
But here's the question: how's
yeah.
lawfare that's going on? How is that being viewed in Europe? If you can discern an opinion, and for a guy that's not been in the continental United States, what do you think about all this?
So the Europeans, mostly I'm watching French and British TV. Those are the two big. I do watch a bit of German TV, but it's in English. Anyway, the way they view Trump's legal issues, they follow it, obviously. Trump is, you get clicks and ad revenues wherever it is. Trump is, he's big, he's good business. He's good for business, okay? Because viewers want to, they want to tune in and find out what's going on. I would say that their view on, and I'll just go through quickly all of them. Their view on the Stormy Daniels thing is that it's tawdry. They don't like talking about it. They feel it's kind of slimy, sleazy stuff. They don't like the way Trump handled it. They don't like the way that New York has handled it. They don't like the constant obsession by CNN and others with who fell asleep, or they don't like the late night stuff that's being done. It's really, that does not sit well with Europeans at all. I think the Europeans are less forgiving on Trump with the delay by the judge in Florida of the documents case. They feel that that is a victory for Trump on the judge situation. So they dissected that a lot. They feel that the Fannie Willis in the Georgia case blew it. They would have liked to have seen, the Europeans would have liked to have seen a real trial on that one, and they don't think that that's going to happen. And similarly for the immunity thing with the Supreme Court, they are a little bit freaked out about that. The Europeans, especially the British, talk about the Magna Carta and divine right and immunity and things like that, and they feel all those questions should have been by the by, in that they believe that the Supreme Court is kind of parsing it a bit, and they talk about that a lot too. So I think just Trump's legal issues are talked about a lot, but the one in New York is viewed very negatively.
Okay, great. All right, next thing: the um, globalism versus nationalism, or a middle path. What's going to happen, or what are you thinking about on that?
Well, I think a year ago I would have said to you, I really dislike nationalism. I still don't like the word nationalism because it leads to a lot of issues. The flip side is that globalism is clearly under threat. It's not working as well as everybody had hoped. The good news about globalism, and I think it's very good news, I've been in all those countries that you say, and probably 2 to 3 billion people have been pulled out of poverty due to global product development and production. China, India, not just them, Indonesia, you go up in all over Asia kind of thing. So the global kind of production thing is a positive thing. In Europe, they look at globalism a little bit negatively. They look at it a little bit like the American right does, which is kind of a conspiracy cabal. This is the land of conspiracies, Richard. Everybody's got a conspiracy about that. Some people still talk about George Soros kind of thing. On the nationalism side, you're beginning to see a comeback for the nationalists, not like strong nationalism here in the sense of, strident nationalism. But what you do see here is people wanting to talk about their national character and to stand up for that. It's nascent. It's just beginning. My prediction is you're going to see a growth of nationalism here. There are still people talking about Europe as a federalist place. Not going to happen. The days of Europe looking as kind of like United States of Europe, I think those are over. You're going to have
Yeah,
more, people looking at their own national interest versus the EU interest.
Okay. So we'll go to the next topic. That's my bell there for the lightning round. So go. Okay. So all right, the press, and when we talk about the press, you can differentiate between the established media ecosystem and then perhaps this nascent direct consumer reporting or any other aspect. But any sense whether the press is trying to navigate back to its original role versus looking at themselves as
Yeah.
advocates?
Yeah, so I watch, and I'll just tick them off. I don't want to do the drudge, but I watch CNN, BBC, the French stations, German stations. Those are my primary ones. I have to tell you, by far the best news that I watch that tries to navigate its center left is PBS NewsHour. Sorry, but these guys actually have a 1 hour news program which provides in-depth kind of coverage, and that's the only place I get it. If you ask me about trying to navigate back to the middle, I would say it's up and down, yes, no, yes, no. I do think that CNN, they had their ill-fated guy that came in, Chris, whatever his name, that crashed and burned. They're now back to Trump bashing, not terribly so. There are people that are awful on there, kind of thing. But I watch Fox. Fox is going to great lengths to try to, make excuses for Trump things. I think the biggest problem that we have with the media is that they focus too much on Trump, to be honest. They need to focus on more things besides Trump. They need to focus on whatever it is, climate change. I don't care what it is, but it's got to be something more than Trump. And that's a problem. And I don't think that the news media is made a tremendous amount of progress navigating away from Trump. I'm sorry to say that.
Great. Well, that tees up the final question on the lightning round and final question for us today. We're going to have a presidential election in the United States later this year. What do you think the issues are going to be? And perhaps what should
Number
they
one
be?
issue, what should they be? Well, what should they be is they're definitely not going to be what I think they should be. I think they should be a lot more focused on how to make how to transition the U.S. economy to a more productive economy. I think that's a big one. How to improve to bring up a greater number of people into the middle class and to foster that middle class. I think they should be about women's rights, but not in this kind of balkanized, crazy thing that we have litigation every 5 minutes. That's kind of, to me, it should also be about what is the U.S. role in the world. particularly in Europe. We didn't even mention Asia Pacific, but or any other place, but it should be about the U.S. role. Those are the issues I think that should be in discussion. I think that what's really going to happen is the Democrats are going to focus on abortion because they think that that's a winner in their swing states. I think that Trump is going to focus on, hearkening back to what he calls the great years, the first 3 years of the Trump presidency. He's going to ignore the last year. Biden's going to try to ignore inflation, which is now semi under control, but it was bad for a while. So I think you're going to have things that are all over the park where people are essentially going to blame each other. And I'm sorry to say, I think at the end it's going to be the same old thing that it was before, which is turnout. So if you get turnout, you're going to get a good result for your side or not. The only thing that I worry about, and I'm outside the U.S. and I want to hear your opinion on this, is this whole idea of accepting or not accepting the results of the election. I think ultimately if Trump loses, he will say he did not lose, but I think he will not foment any kind of serious issues. I think if Biden loses, I think the left is going to have a meltdown, but they will accept that Trump won.
Yeah, will they let him govern? Because last time they didn't. So we'll find out. And I think you're exactly right. And Trump is just a peddler, right? It's like, I lose? No, I didn't lose. He got more electoral votes than that, but I didn't lose. All right. Anyway, that's just who he is. And what my concern about a second Trump term is, like, who's he going to get to fill cabinet roles? That, who's he got left that would be trustworthy and competent? And I guess I have that same worry about Biden. And maybe it comes down to the VP pick. Who knows? So we'll find out.
Yeah, I think that if I just want to mention one thing about that. I think if they're a lot like Stephen Miller, we got a problem. If they're more like Bill Barr, I think that's acceptable. Those are the kind of my kind of parameters. Mike Pompeo was great. Remember me. I've been a Pompeo fan. So yeah, to fill the cabinet posts, I think that's important. And they need to be people who are loyal to Trump, but they also need to be loyal first to the United States.
That's right. Yeah. The Constitution. Hey, Robert, it's always good to talk to you. And I appreciate, learning what continent you're going to be on. If you're in the upper Midwest or other locales that you find me, do come for a visit. And, we can sit in Studio K and try to solve the world, or at least chat about it. And before we sign off here, is anything that we didn't talk about that you'd like to get out there to our listeners, our readers, and our viewers?
Yeah, I want to make a statement about, I think investing, the way that the world looks at the United States is that people may not like Biden, but the investment that are being made in infrastructure, chips, etc., the world looks at the United States as making a very smart move. TSMC is now putting a 3-stage, $60 billion facility in Arizona. These are things where the United States is clearly winning. They were not winning before. So if Trump comes in, what I'm hoping is that Trump does not step away from that he accepts it as, a victory and, fosters that thing. The United States is seen as still the most powerful country in the world. Some people say in decline. The Europeans don't see it in decline. The Europeans see it as a country that they hope will weather the election, and that they will continue to be great friends with Europe. And I want to make one last shout out to the partnership between the Anglosphere, that's a lot discussion here, which is the UK, the United States, Australia, and New Zealand, and Canada. Those 5 countries, which are called the Anglosphere, all of your listeners and people who watch this should remember, they are very tight. And that probably will hold together the Western world in the future.
We've been talking today with Robert Greenfield, a man with extensive experience in many continents, in business, government, and an astute observer of our social systems. And with that, this is your host, Rich Helppie, signing off on the Common Bridge.
Thanks for joining us on the Common Bridge. Subscribe to the Common Bridge on Substack.com or use their Substack app where you can find more interviews, columns, videos, and nonpartisan discussions of the day. Just search for the Common Bridge. You can also find the Common Bridge on Mission Control Radio or your Radio Garden app.